Hello and welcome to another Portworx demo. My name is Ryan Wallner, and today we're going to be walking through how to get started with the AWS Marketplace offering for Portworx Enterprise. So the first thing you're going to want to do is head over to the Portworx landing page for the AWS Marketplace offerings. You should see the Enterprise plus Disaster Recovery or the Enterprise offering. We're going to go ahead and select the Enterprise offering. There's a bunch of information on this page in terms of pricing and usage, but go ahead and continue to subscribe once you're ready to move forward. Accept the terms of the subscription, and you should see this "thank you for subscribing," and they're going to process the request for that subscription for Portworx Enterprise. This will take a few minutes, but after a few minutes, the Portworx Enterprise subscription will become live in your AWS account, and you will have access to deploy the AWS Marketplace offering for Portworx. A few quick notes for while that's happening. To get started with this offering, you're going to want to install EKS CTL, which is a CLI utility for managing EKS clusters, because the Marketplace offering does use EKS. Definitely head over to the Amazon documentation and install that. The other thing you want to do is go ahead and install Helm. Since Portworx does install the Marketplace offering using a Helm repository, definitely get these two things installed on your system before moving forward. Once your subscription is ready to go ahead and click Continue to Configuration and select the delivery method, which is only the scale option for Container Maker, and the version of Portworx, which we're going to run 2.6.1, which is the latest release right now. Then continue to launch, and this will bring you to the usage instructions, which points to our Portworx documentation on how to get started with the Marketplace. The first thing you're going to want to do is create a role which will be used for in your EKS cluster nodes. So I have already gone ahead and created this role called PWX node role 0000, and it has all the actions listed in the documentation here. So if you don't have that yet, definitely create that role first. You can do that through the CLI or directly through the IAM management console by creating a new one and pasting the JSON. The next thing you want to do is launch your EKS cluster. This is done through EKS CTL, and the way that that is done is you create a configuration, which is YAML. And here's an example of what this looks like. It is a cluster configuration. There's a name to the cluster and a bunch of information defining what's in that cluster. Portworx needs at least 3 storage nodes, so we have a node group for storage nodes, which is a minimum of 3. And we're going to label those with the node type storage and the node group worker. This is where that node policy comes in, the ARN that we have here listed. We can copy that and place that in this cluster configuration file. Definitely go ahead and take a look at the documentation. It has an example of how to deploy Portworx with this cluster config. You can look up that in the Portworx documentation, and I'll put a link below in this video. Portworx additionally can use storage-less nodes, meaning applications only run there and Portworx providing storage does not. This is optional, but in many cases, auto-scaling storage-less nodes for application demand, for burst capacity, this is a good idea. So we define a second node group called storage-less nodes with 1 desired capacity and a maximum of 3. Attach the same ARN because you will need to be able to use those actions in there as well. And go ahead and create this by running the command EKS CTL create cluster with a -f and pointing at this, just like that. So I've gone ahead and pre-created this cluster for us. it is running in the background, and we'll be able to use this once it gets completed. So as we go forward and wait for that EKS cluster to be ready, I'm going to go walk through the rest of this marketplace documentation so that it makes sense as we're going through it. Once your EKS cluster is ready and you have access to a Kubernetes cluster in AWS, the first thing we do is need to connect our AWS subscription to our cluster before we run Portworx so that it ties to that license. So by doing this, we create the IAM association with our specific cluster name. And we create a service account, which allows us to do the marketplace metering for AWS Marketplace offerings such as Portworx Enterprise. After we do those two things, then we can move on to installing Portworx. And this is where Helm comes in. Portworx is provided through a public Helm repository. And here we configure the Helm installation parameters. Now we're going to use defaults here, which is really just using a GP2 single class of EBS drives, meaning that we'll have Portworx aggregate those drives over the worker nodes and provide storage. But if you want to, you can provide even more using that storage.drives. This is important because not only can you provide a single disk type, you can provide another disk type, such as IL1. This will give you sort of two classes of storage, and therefore your applications can request sort of a fast or medium or slow class of service. For this explanation, we're just going to keep it simple and use the type GB2 with a size of 100. Over our 3 storage nodes will give us 300 gigabytes of storage. But keep in mind, walk through these Helm parameters and make sure that you have everything configured the way you want it. We're leaving most of these as defaults for this example, but definitely pay attention to the various ways that you can configure this. All right, so going back up, this guide also has instructions on how to upgrade and reconfigure the AWS Marketplace offering, as well as uninstall the Portworx cluster that is part of your subscription. All right, so let's scroll back up, and we are creating our EKS clusters. The next thing we need to do is configure EKS itself. Let's check on our cluster. And what we're going to do is let this complete and come back and finish the configuration. So stay tuned. All right, welcome back. It looks like our EKS cluster is ready. So what we can do here is do a kubectl get nodes to see what's going on. So we had 3 storage nodes and 1 storageless node. So we can see here 4 total nodes is what we expect. So now let's continue and run those various commands for setting up the marketplace offering. Remember, it's associating the provider and creating the service account. So let's first associate our cluster, then create the service account, which is actually going to launch a small stack that gets deployed to make sure the AWS metering and configuration works as expected. This will take a few seconds, so in the meantime, let's take a look at what options we're going to use for our Helm installation. Remember, for Helm, there are various options here. The example in our documentation gives the type GP2 with a 1 terabyte drive size. For this example, I don't need 1 terabytes of storage, so I'm going to just reduce that to 100 so that I get a total of 3 drives across 3 storage nodes for a total of 300 gigabytes of storage that's usable by our containers. So this should be done probably within 1 minute to associate the service account with the Portworx cluster that we're running in EKS. So any second now, this should complete and we can move on to our Helm steps. Keep in mind that before you deploy Helm using the Workplace offering, you need to add the repo that Portworx provides. I've already done this, so it'll say, it already exists, but make sure that the repo is added to your Helm configuration. The next thing we could do is install Portworx. So I'm going to run some basic with using mostly defaults install, which is my Portworx release, and the storage drive, like we said, GB2 size 100, and associate it with that service account that we created before. So Helm will go ahead and configure that release into our KS cluster. And here we can see some basic information that's provided in that release, such as the timestamp it was deployed, what namespace, that it was the first revision, and that its status is deployed. Now keep in mind, what you can do to get the status of what's going on is list the containers that are running in the cube namespace, which is Portworx runs in the cube system namespace, so you can get pods with the label of name equals Portworx in cube namespace and see that here we have Portworx starting its containers. They're only 30 seconds old, so it's going to do some initialization, such as creating those EBS drives of GP2, attaching them to the workers, aggregating them, and then once all that's done, the status will become operational and we should be able to use our Portworx cluster. Keep in mind that 3 of these are storage nodes and 1 is storage less, and we can dive into actually which ones those are in a second. But if you want to get the information about what's going on, you can also fetch the logs using the label name equals Portworx, and of course the namespace of cube system. So there's going to be a lot going on here, but effectively this is all the logs that are coming out of every single one of your containers. It'll give you the configuration that it's using based on the cluster configuration and the Helm installation that you're using, as well as any errors or issues that may arise during installation. And you can keep running this logs command to sort of check on and see what's going on. But as you can see, Portworx is sort of downloading what it needs and making sure that its process is running. To keep an eye on the installation, we can keep running that command to get the status of the cluster. So keep in mind, your Portworx cluster won't be usable until you see this ready number be 1 out of 1. It usually takes anywhere between 3 and 5 minutes with the initial configuration, but at its core, you've done all you've needed to use the AWS Marketplace offering from Portworx. At this point, the cluster is starting, and in a few minutes, we'll be able to check on the status and deploy applications using the Portworx Enterprise deployment from the AWS Marketplace subscription. So it looks like we have one running. Around 3 minutes it took to install that. And if we keep checking, we should see many of them start to come online at the same time. So we have 2 of them ready. We're gonna wait till we have 3 of them ready to check on the status. There we go. We have 1, 2, 3 ready. So now I'm going to run a command to grab one of the Portworx pods in an environment variable called pxpod. This will allow me to exec into that pod and run a command such as pixie-cuddle status. And here you can see that the status of our cluster is Portworx is operational. The license is Portworx Enterprise AWS as expected, because that is our subscription through the AWS Marketplace. We have a single device, also expected at 100 gigabytes, and a total capacity of 300 gigabytes with 1, 2, and 3 storage nodes. So that is how you deploy Portworx Enterprise on AWS EKS using the AWS Marketplace offering from Portworx. I hope that was useful. I'll put some links in the description below the video. And until next time, take care.